Hey Cleveland, your favorite show is on. Good Day with Olivia begins right now.
And,
Like, who's Olivia?
You're kidding, right?
Who's Olivia? You know, that girl on the radio. You know, the little short girl. She ain't no but 3 feet tall. You know, her love for the city is greater than her stature.
No, I'm just kidding,
It
Cleveland.
was a joke. It was a joke. It was a joke. She's a baby. Light up a little bit.
Right. Tell him some more.
She's my favorite host on the KZ Radio and Television Network.
Connecting Cleveland. It's Good Day with
Olivia.
I'm your host, Olivia Winston, reporting live from Cleveland.
CLE.
You're tuned into GDWO. Good Day with Olivia starts right now.
And welcome back to the Good Day with Olivia show. I'm your host, Olivia Winstead, here serving up the good news each and every Saturday morning at 9. Cleveland, as the voting deadlines approach, so many leaders in the Cleveland community are working hard to educate and prepare residents for the upcoming general election. In the studio, I have back with me today Sierra Lipscomb. She was on 2 weeks ago with Councilwoman Phyllis Cleveland from Ward 5 to discuss the importance of voting, especially here in the city of Cleveland. And she's back today with another student from Case Western Reserve University. We have Mamadi Jallo, and they're here to discuss the population of young voters and their participation in past voting. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And their participation in past elections. So welcome to the studio, both of you. So, Sierra, you're from Case Western Reserve University, and you are from Case Western Reserve University. Are you guys, well, I know you're a Cleveland native. Are you a Cleveland native? Were you born and raised here in the city?
No, I was born in New York City.
You were born in New York City. How long have you been here? Just since you've been in school?
Yeah, only about a year.
Only about a year. Is this your freshman year?
No, this is my sophomore year, actually.
Sophomore year. Oh, wow. And were you a transfer student or?
No, I came here as a
Oh,
freshman.
I see. And you are in your senior year?
Yes.
Yes.
In my senior year, I'm a history and sociology double major on the pre-law track, so currently applying to law school.
Yes. Well, and what is your major?
I'm a computer science and political science major.
Very interesting. Well, welcome you both. Welcome back. So, Cleveland, before we jump right into the interview this morning, what I like to, since we're talking about voting, I like to bring up the deadline. So, we have October 9th as the registration deadline and November 6th for the voting deadline. So, that'll be election day. So, if you're not registered, go check out the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections website for more details about how to get registered to vote and where you need to go to vote. Jumping right back into the topic and turning it right back to you. So let's start with you attend Case University. So you both are part of the same organization there. What's the name of that organization?
So it's officially called the Andrew Goodman Foundation Vote Everywhere Program. And so the Andrew Goodman Foundation is like an umbrella foundation for several different programs, including Vote Everywhere. And basically what we do, there are over 50 partner universities across the country, and each university has a team of Vote Everywhere ambassadors. And so the Vote Everywhere ambassadors sort of serve as civic engagement, political engagement champions on their campuses. And so we do voter registration, we do voter education, we do get out the vote efforts, but I think also importantly, we also focus on a lot of social issues and issues and barriers to voting as they relate to college students. So across the country, you will see that on a lot of university campuses, there aren't polling locations. So basically this forces a lot of college students to have to go outside of campus in order to vote, and that often poses a significant challenge and an inconvenience for students. So that's one of the main focuses of the organization, is to ensure that we try to eliminate some of these barriers to voting.
Very good. Now, let me ask you both this. I want to talk about Case Western Reserve University.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead and tell us a little bit about the school you attend.
You want to talk a little bit about it?
So it's a private research. It's a private university that was founded in 1826. So I believe it just had its 175th anniversary. It's an incredibly diverse school. You can see people from all different walks of life at the university. There's an engineering school and arts and sciences schools. Many people see it usually only as an engineering school, but there are a huge amount of people who are studying economics, business, finance, and other things.
Mm-hmm.
It's a school that fosters unity, togetherness, and it works to help people understand more things about the world. And it's kind of, I feel like it's in one of the hearts of Cleveland. There's a lot of things in the area that you can see, like the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Cleveland Botanical Garden. So there are a lot of cultural connections that students can form with the city by going to Case Western, which I think is pretty great.
Yeah. Now, the efforts of your organization, is it just limited to the students who attend Case Western Reserve University?
So our primary focus is for the students at Case Western Reserve University. But I think increasingly we're trying to expand our outreach efforts and try to expand more into the overall Cleveland community, because we don't live in a bubble. I mean, Case Western Reserve University, although it is a private institution, it is in this metropolis area, and I mean, we think it's important just as ambassadors, and our campus chairman, which is our advisor on campus, the Center for Civic Engagement and Learning, also thinks it's very important to be engaged with the community. So we're working on efforts to kind of foster community partnerships and to work more with the citizenry outside the campus, because that's incredibly important. And I think it's important in terms of just making sure that students know that they're not in a bubble. We're not our own institution in a vacuum. It's important to really engage with those outside the community as well.
Wonderful. So what are your roles within this organization? What is it that you do, Mama D?
So right now I work under Sierra as our team leader with another ambassador who couldn't be here today, Chloe. What I've basically done so far is mostly work on registering people to vote, holding tabling events. We did that at the student activities fair. I did that near the freshman dorms on another day so that I could register freshmen who didn't really know much about how voting in Cleveland worked, or where their polling locations were, or how they could get absentee ballots. Mm-hmm. Just last week it was National Voter Registration Day, so there was a huge program in the CISO office at Case Western. That's the office for civic engagement and learning, and we registered I think dozens of people to vote, and we gave them their absentee ballots and showed them where they could vote.
Wonderful. So what's an absentee ballot?
An absentee ballot is a ballot that is for a person who is not in the place where they are registered to vote, so they can send in a request for the voting board of elections in the district or county that they're from to send them a ballot, and they can fill out that ballot and mail it back, so their vote will be counted in the election.
Okay, and so that would be that would be useful for people who maybe are traveling or won't be available on that date.
Right, especially for students. So Case Western Reserve has a high population of students that aren't from Ohio, and so it's incredibly important to make sure that they still are able, if they want to vote from their primary residency in their home state. And so an absentee ballot allows them to do just that.
Okay.
Whenever you have a transient population where maybe their primary residency isn't in their current, residency, it's important to have that as an option.
Yes. So how did you both get involved with this organization? And how long have you been a part of the organization?
I just started this school year. I literally started at the end of August. I saw a flyer for it in an office in the school, on campus, and I thought it was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for me, so I've been doing this program since I was a freshman. So, like, put that in perspective. I'm a senior now, so it's going on 3 years. And I was really drawn to the Vote Everywhere program because of its historical significance. Mm-hmm. So I was playing a little bit about, like, what the Andrew Goodman Foundation is and, like, its namesake. Yeah. So Andrew Goodman was actually a student civil rights worker who in the Freedom Summer of 1964 went to Mississippi along with other student workers to register primarily African Americans to vote. At the time, during the Civil Rights Movement, getting African Americans the right to vote, making sure that they had access to the polls was important because there were so many barriers. You had polling taxes, you had literacy tests, you had intimidation at the polls. Wow. And so at that time, it was thought that it would be important for students to really get involved. So you had a lot of students coming from the north, going south, to ensure that African Americans were not only getting registered to vote, but that they had access to the polls on election day. So Andrew Goodman was a part of that movement, which really culminated during Freedom Summer of 1964. And unfortunately, Andrew Goodman, along with 2 other student workers, James Chaney and Michael Schwerner, they were actually murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi on their first night in the state, for the work that they were doing around voter engagement with African Americans. So, I mean, out of that historical legacy and as a history major, that stood out to me, and as a person that comes from 2 demographics who were historically disenfranchised, I'm an African American and I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. I really felt like, this was not only a calling, but it was a duty to really step in and do this type of work.
Absolutely. What an interesting background history about the organization. So I want to discuss voting criteria. What is the criteria that you must meet to be considered an eligible voter?
You must be the age of 18. You must be registered to vote. You must have valid forms of identification to show that you live in the state and county that you're trying to vote in, and that you're not trying to vote anywhere else. Mm-hmm. Let me know if I missed anything, Sierra.
No,
Did he miss anything?
I think that's the ballpark components. Yeah, definitely, especially in the state of Ohio. So we do have voter ID requirements, I think since 2005. So when you go to the polls, you can't just simply go vote. You have to show proof of identity, and that comes in the form of a military ID, a utility bill, a driver's license, or state ID.
A utility bill?
Yeah, all of these are forms of identifying documentation that you can take with you to the polls to show and prove that you are who you say you are. So, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know you could use a utility bill.
Yeah.
Wow. And you don't need any other form of ID with that utility bill. Just bring the bill in?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think it's important to take at least 2 just in case.
Yeah.
So maybe take a utility bill and a state ID or driver's license, or some variation of that, just in case.
What are the voting stats here in Ohio? Or maybe even if we could get more specific, Cleveland? Or does it not go just by individual cities, but the whole state?
Yeah, well, I can't give you specific statistics as far as like the voting stats here in Ohio, but I can tell you about youth voter participation on like a national scale.
Yes, let me ask you this before you provide that information. Are you able to tell us what percentage of eligible voters are voting in the state of Ohio? Can you
percentage
of eligible voters are voting?
I don't know the exact statistic, but it falls well below the amount of people that are eligible voters, and especially among youth. So right now, the what we would consider as the millennial population, so that is people who fall within the age of 18 and 35 age bracket. voter participation, voter turnout among that age demographic is incredibly low, and especially in terms of midterm elections, which we are in that season now.
Why do you think people just have a lack of interest in midterm elections? Where do you think that lack of interest comes from?
I believe that comes from the fact that there's just a general apathy towards the political system, and the fact that it's not a general election where a president is being elected. Like, even with a presidential election, only around a third of the people will vote, and that's because, well, this is the leader of the country, better. And in a midterm election, most people don't really know who is representing them in Congress or who's representing them in the Senate, and so they don't feel like they have to take the time to go vote. Some people don't even know that the midterms are coming up and only vote once every 4 years.
Now, a couple weeks ago, we discussed how important it was to vote during midterms, because the people you're voting for are the people who will be representing you and may have direct contact, communication with people in higher levels of government to advocate for the issues that are most important to you. We discussed that a couple weeks ago. So what's your take on it? What do you think is also contributing to the lack of interest in voting? Do youth think that their vote really doesn't matter? What is it?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's a part of the answer is voter apathy, but I think also a lot of it has to do with inconveniences to voting. So, like I said, talking about voting barriers, a lot of youth just don't know where to vote, and a lot of times in a lot of communities, their polling location may not be immediately near. So then you run into a question of transportation. So you have that. You also have, and this could actually apply to more than just youth, but also minority and low income voters. But just a feeling that their voice is just not being heard. When you have populations that feel like they've been vilified or oppressed or subordinated, in the democratic process, you often run into just a general feeling that what is it worth to participate? And why should it matter? It's not going to change anything. So I think part of it is trying to change that culture and change that ideology, and really get people to understand that you may think that individually, but there's a ton of people that think the same thing. It's important that as a collective that we change that mentality and come out and show out at the polls.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that some of the challenges are location. So that includes getting to that location, being able to identify the locations, and then also having proper identification. Yes. And let me ask, how is your organization helping students, youth, overcome these challenges? What are you doing?
Well, for one thing, one of the things we're making sure that people know where they can go to vote. And actually, I think one of the best things that this program does is that we have like shuttle programs, so that we'll literally drive people to the polls. You can't really escape voting if someone will take you there for free without you having to put any effort into it.
Just for the students, right?
Yes.
So I can't show up if I lived around the corner. Hey, I need a vote to the poll. But I think that's wonderful. And how long have you guys been around at Case Western Reserve University? How long have you been providing transportation at least? Is this new?
No. So actually, was it for the presidential election of 2016? Because the program was started at Case during the spring of 2016. And so that fall of that year, there was a presidential election. And so we actually, during that time, came up with the idea of doing shuttles, and also during the early voting period. So a lot of people forget that you can actually vote early, because, election day falls on a Tuesday, and for a lot of people, whether you're young or older, that's sort of like
during the week.
During
work
the week,
work days.
So there is a period of time before the actual general election day, that you can vote early and go to your local board of elections and cast your vote, if that's what you want to do. Or you can even do an absentee ballot. I mean, I think people underutilize that resource as well. Like, you can request an absentee ballot even if it's for your own county.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an important resource, especially if, like I said, the election day falls on a Tuesday. And, of course, I mean, we're all busy, and that may just be an incredibly busy day for you. So, I mean, you want to think about and have a plan. We like to talk about having a plan to vote. So how are you going to actually cast that ballot? First of all, how are you going to get it formed? And then how are you going to go cast that ballot for the election?
How is class relevant to voting?
It's very relevant.
Okay.
So
and maybe, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't deliver that question correctly, but what are the effects of class in voting turnout?
Well, so in general, when we talk about elections, oftentimes the message that comes from a lot of politicians across the spectrum isn't necessarily geared toward the low-income voter. A lot of times they're looking at the middle class and upper class voter to really capitalize on supporting and then coming out during election season. So, and a lot of that is because, of course, those populations have confidence in the democratic process. And a lot of that confidence arrives from some forms of privilege. So it's important that we, as people, and especially if you're running for an elected office, to really gear your message towards those that are low income, because a lot of times they don't feel like they're being talked to.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you don't feel like you're being talked to, and then subsequently you're being vilified or you are being spoken down to, you're not going to get a very receptive audience out of that.
Yes. So, minorities in voting, how important is it for minorities to participate in the voting process? And why don't you go ahead and define minority for our audience members out there?
Well, a minority would be a a member of the population that isn't a part of the majority, like, let's say African Americans, around 10% of the population, Asian Americans, around 5% of the population. Those are minorities, while Caucasians, whites are over, I believe, 50% of the population, making them the majority. And minorities not taking part in the political process, that's becoming complicit in the lack of representation that you have, the lack of policies that you have that benefit your people, that benefit you individually, because politicians, they will serve the people who come out and vote. They will serve the people who come out and are part of the political process.
Can you say that again loud into the mic?
I said politicians will serve the people who will vote. They will serve the people who will come out and participate in the political process. So you can't really complain about not having representation or not having laws that benefit you or your family if you don't take part in the political process of the country.
So to be heard, you must show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You must show up at the table.
That's right. That's right. But, African Americans or any minority group, if we're such a small percentage of our population, how important is our vote, really?
Well, there are districts and counties where African Americans or other minority populations are the majority in those areas. If you go into a county in eastern Cleveland, you'll definitely it would have a larger population of African Americans. Yet in some of these counties, they're still being represented by politicians that don't really know many things about them, that aren't the same race as them, which isn't necessarily an issue, but they don't really know the issues that are facing these communities. So you want, in areas where your people are a large part of that area, you want representation that understands who you are and will be able to do the job for you that you want them to do.
Yes. So what are some of the goals of your organization for throughout this year, or the rest of this year, specifically and for next year?
Yes.
Future.
So I think one of our first and foremost goals is to ensure that eligible voters are registered to vote. A lot of the eligible voter demographic is not registered. And so it's important to at least take that initial step and to do that. But then secondly, to educate the eligible voter population and those that are registered, because like during our last conversation, we talked about the importance of being informed. So not just giving your vote to anyone or anything, but also learning about the issues, learning about the candidates, seeing what their platforms are and how and why and to what shape or form those issues and those platforms kind of are important to you in your overall life and your overall goals. So like we encourage that people read like nonpartisan voter information guides to really get a good sense of what's on the ballot and who's on the ballot, and that way they can make an informed decision. And then thirdly, making sure that people get to the polls and are able to get to the polls, and that any barriers to getting to the polls are eliminated or as minimal as possible. So, at Vote Everywhere at Case Western Reserve University, like Mama Lee said, like we are doing shuttles to the polls to make sure that students have transportation. We also during the early voting period, we'll also be doing souls to the polls. That means taking students on the health line to the Board of Elections so that they have another opportunity to go cast their ballot, and also just making sure that people have their right identification and any other information relevant to casting their ballot.
Is there anywhere to get registered to vote on campus?
Yeah, so the like umbrella advising organization on Case's campus is called the Center for Civic Engagement and Learning, and so they really serve as the arm of like the voter registration movement on campus. And so it's important that you can come to that office at Case if you want to get registered to vote, and they'll actually put you into contact with us as Vote Everywhere ambassadors if you have other information that you may need or want.
Now, I'm assuming, like I said, I don't like to assume, we're all under the age of 35 here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. How old are you?
I'm 19.
19?
21.
21. I'm 26. Amen. Now, the message to your peers, our peers, what is the message you'd like to get across today?
I feel like the most important part of the political process is education. I think that people knowing about what these politicians who are being voted into office have the power to do is the most important thing, so that they can become engaged and understand how their voice actually matters in determining who represents them and what policies go into place.
Where can the folks reach you?
Well, you can reach us at Case Western Reserve University. If you go to the Center for Civic Engagement website, you can find a link for our organization there. You can also go to the andrewgoodman.org. That is our national website, and you can learn about all of our wonderful campus teams across the country, including ours at Case Western Reserve. You can follow us on Facebook at Vote Everywhere CWRU if you would like. So there's multiple opportunities to reach us.
Well, there you have it, Cleveland. Educate yourself, stay engaged, and show up, Cleveland. I'll see you at the polls. You've been tuned in to Good Day with Olivia. I'm Olivia Winster, signing off until next week.